those new one Sunday new.
All right, guys. So, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Cozy Corner TV live stream. So today I'm just kind of hopping on because I want you guys to see something. On the Daily Signal, they're actually talking about the Trump versus Iranian nuclear program. So I'm actually gonna play that for you guys. I might hop on here a little bit after, but it was actually something
News
I wanted to
program
sort of
really
watch.
going hard after it. Scott Jennings on Friday night, by the way, brought up that people who are just so desperate, just like wishing upon.
So it's gonna start kind of right here. Shout out to the Daily Signal. I usually react to things by them. You guys always see that. We usually react to Victor Davis Hanson, and he's on the Daily Signal. They got a couple of hosts on there. So I wanted to just kind of pull this one up and let us watch it because since it's about a nuclear program, I was like, this is pretty important. So I want to play this tonight because I thought it was super important. So you guys have a watch. And if it ends too soon, I'll be back. If not, I'll still be back in a few minutes to close you guys out.
It's the Tony Kinnett on 93
You guys watch Tony Kinnett. Shout out to you, Tony, at the Daily Signal. Thanks for
International news just yet. You want to take a break from the domestic side of policy? We have on Ali Reza Jafar Zadeh he's the deputy director of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And we've got all kinds of updates and analysis on the White House suggesting the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program needs to happen, or else the U.S. and Iran, or excuse me, the U.S. and Israel are preparing to hold talks next week about it. I mean, where do we even begin? Thanks for joining us, first of all.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
So give us the breakdown.
Shout out to Tony.
New kind of line of messaging towards the Iranian regime and the nuclear program. Is this different than the last couple of years? Because I saw on the Sunday news shows, some of the anchors were trying to say that this was just a lot of bluster. What do you think?
Well, first of all, the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime is nothing new. But unfortunately, the outside world has not been paying attention to the agenda of the Iran regime when it comes to the nuclear weapons program.
Got nukes.
Back in August of 2002, we here in Washington, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, held a press conference and for the first time revealed the nuclear site in Natanz, which is uranium enrichment facility, and the heavy water facility in Iraq. That revelation triggered the IAEA, which is a UN nuclear watchdog, inspection of the Iranian nuclear sites for the first time that has continued ever since. And within less than a year, we held several other press conferences revealing various aspects of the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime, which at the time were in the earlier stages. And we expected the outside world to really get on it and do whatever it takes in terms of pressuring the Iran regime
guys? Hit that like button for me while you're sitting in the chat.
Their nuclear weapons program. But unfortunately, they got into negotiations. They got into giving the Iran regime concessions. At the time, it was the EU3 that was leading the negotiations.
Right.
And they gave all kinds of concessions to the Iran regime, allowing the Iran regime to get this far. That now they have weaponization program, they have several sites, they have underground facilities enriching uranium. They're working on building nuclear warheads. We just had another press conference in the late January of this year showing how the organization is in charge of building the bomb, the nuclear bomb, is moving forward very rapidly. So there is only really, honestly, one way left in order to end the nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime, which has been our call all these years, saying all of these sites need to be closed down. The only remaining solution at this stage is really ending the rule of the clerics, which is, of course, the responsibility of the people of Iran and the organized resistance. But the outside world can make it difficult for the Ayatollahs by imposing sanctions, by snapping back all the UN Security Council resolutions,
Sneaker
on the Iranian regime
Xmas.
and
What's up?
recognizing the
Shout
right
out
of the
to
people
you.
of
Hit that
Iran
like button.
to bring about change in
Free
Iran.
Snatch
Other than
Off.
that,
What's up? How you
I
doing?
can't
Thanks
think
for
of
stopping
any
by.
other
Hit that like
solutions.
button.
So I'm reminded of a time
XXX
when I
fans,
was
gay.
a younger man and I
Gay
would
means
want
happy,
to do
weirdo. Are
something,
you happy?
whether it was
If
fixing
you're happy,
something
you
that I
just say
had
happy.
broken,
You
or
don't have to say
whether
gay.
it was some kind of task that was set before me. And my father would tell me, son, this is how you need to do it. This is what you need to do. And whether it's out of youthful arrogance, or whether it was out of spite, or whether it was out of stubbornness, I would try to fix the problem every other way I could. And then finally, after every other option was tried, I would finally relent and say, you know what, you're right, we should have done what you suggested from the first place. And that's what I'm seeing here, only it's with an actual nuclear weapon clock taped onto the end of it. I mean, the only way that Iran is going to dismantle its nuclear program is by the strong arm of force. There's no other, I mean, the as you put it, the cleric regime is not going to say, you know what, we're convinced, you guys are right, we'll just, turn it into a daisy field. And that's not going to happen.
Absolutely right. I mean, I love that analogy that you gave, and that's exactly the same situation, unfortunately, that the entire international community were pursuing over the years. And the Iran regime has invested so heavily on their nuclear weapons program, because this is part and parcel of their strategy that relies on two pillars: killing their own people inside the country, exporting terrorism, having these proxy groups, and then developing nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons program of the Iran regime has been very costly. At least $2 trillion has been the cost of this program for the Iran regime, which has been really a big hardship on the population. It's the money and the resources of the country that needs to go for improving the economy that was spent on the nuclear weapons program, and then their proxy groups. So it means something for the Ayatollahs. That's why they're investing on it, and that's why they're not going to just give it up because someone is just going to sit down and negotiate with them and just offer them concessions. The only language left for them is that you're going to close down all of these sites,
right.
and this is the timeline. We can work out the timeline, and then we get the IAEA to inspect that those sites were actually shut down. It's not about downsizing any part of the program. It's about shutting it down. That's what we said many years ago.
I'm so tired of the silly argument that, well, you don't want to dismantle the program completely. How will the Iranian people have nuclear power? How will the people... I'm sorry, please correct me if I'm wrong, because you are by far a more experienced and a more circumspect analyst on Middle Eastern policy than I am. Is not the Persian area home to one of the largest oil and natural gas reserves? The idea that the Iranian people would be without energy if we got rid of their nuclear program, that sounds like the silliest excuse one could possibly give to leaving the Ayatollahs in command of a horribly dangerous program.
Well, the nuclear program of the Iran regime since day one has always been about building the bomb, not
Completely.
Energy.
Explicitly.
It's not. We're not talking about nuclear energy. We're talking about developing nuclear weapons. Of course, they always use that excuse that we need this because we're using it for research. We're enriching uranium to over 60% that no one else in the world has ever done, other than for building a nuclear bomb. And they bring some kind of excuses. Those excuses aside, I mean, the people of Iran know that very well, and that's why they're calling for ending the rule of the clerics. They have never accepted any legitimacy for their nuclear weapons program, nor their proxy groups that, they're spending huge amount of money in the region funding these proxy groups, taking away money and resources from the people of Iran and funding the groups there, or even Assad in Syria was kept in power by the Iran regime for years. And as you said, Iran sits on the second largest oil and gas reserves combined in the world. And their oil and gas program is so underdeveloped. It's rotten to the core. There is absolute corruption in the country that the money and resources are being used either to fund their IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards operations, filling the pocket of the clerics, or spending it on their proxies and their nuclear weapons program. It's not being used for the people of Iran. And just keep in mind, during the time that the sanctions were lifted, and the Iran regime was able to bring back their oil export from about 200-300 barrels a day to about close to 2 million barrels a day within that 4 years of past 4 years. Yet the economy got even worse. The people got poorer, and the currency value just depreciated so much. So it's not that the money is being denied from the people of Iran. It's that the money and the resources actually goes to fund terror, to further empower the regime, and then spend money on the nuclear program, their missile program. Their missile program, which is part and parcel of the nuclear weapons program, is also very advanced, and there's a lot of money and resources spent there. All of that needs to stop. As far as the people of Iran are concerned, this is the most patriotic thing for us to block the nuclear weapons program of Iran, because the sole purpose is to guarantee the survival of the regime, that we don't want it, the outside world doesn't want it. And it would, think about for a moment that when you have a free, democratic, non-nuclear republic Iran that is non-belligerent, that is not threatening its neighbors, that is actually helping its own people, what a difference it will make, not just in the region, but for the rest of the world. And that's like the vision, that's the future that I wake up every single morning and I feel more energy to work towards that future.
Director Jafar Zadeh, the one last thing I wanted to dig into here, if I could keep you for just another second or two. I never hear about the impact that the Iranian regime's spending on its proxy terror networks, on its ballistic missile department, on its nuclear program. I never hear about how that affects the people themselves. Like, I never actually hear about how the government's wanton spending, leaching the entire economy of Iran into this terror network, impacts those forced to live under this regime. Can you tell us just briefly about what that does directly to the people?
Well, Iran, as you know, is a very rich country. We're not poor. Any resources you can think of, including oil and gas, exists in Iran. Yet 80% of the Iranian population live below the poverty line. These are according to the regime's own officials. So where does the money go? It goes to these proxies. It goes to spending things that actually undermines the prosperity of the people of Iran and empowers these proxy groups in the region. Look at the slogans in the protests. Since 2018, there have been 9 rounds of major uprisings in Iran. People have been calling for change, and in all 31 provinces of the country, they want a free Iran, they want a democratic Iran, they want a republic based on separation of church and state, and they want to end hostility in the region. These are actually items part of the 10-point plan introduced by the Iranian resistance, by Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, who has introduced this platform and has gotten tremendous support in the US Congress, in European parliamentarians. Over 4,000 sitting parliamentarians in Europe have supported that. Why? Because it corroborates with the desire of the people of Iran. People were chanting during the protests in Iran, "Leave Syria alone, think about us." They said, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I give my life for Iran. So they said the enemy is right here, meaning in Iran. They lie when they say it's the United States. These are chants of the people. People understand that their money and resources are being spent on things that is to the detriment of the people of Iran, but also to the detriment of peace and tranquility in the region. So none of those arguments are bought by the people of Iran. And I think now, after all these years, people have seen, in outside world that what the regime is all about. But one thing that is really helping us at this moment, and I think that should trigger reevaluating policy regarding Iran, whether it's Washington or other places, that how the regime's strategy is now failing. How they have gotten so weakened in the region. All of those proxies that they spent huge amount of money, they're collapsing one after the other. Assad in Syria, which is the biggest ally of Tehran in that part of the world, that the regime spent at least $50 billion and about 100,000 of their proxy forces, including Hezbollah, to keep him in power. The whole thing collapsed in 11 days. And so the regime's that perception of invincibility that Tehran had built is all of that is shattered. That the people in the region have seen that this regime is weak. The people of Iran have seen that this regime is not 10 feet tall and it can be brought down the same way that Assad in Syria was. So the prospect for the future of Iran, which would be free republic and non-nuclear, non-belligerent, is very bright. We need to calibrate the policy here in the United States that would corroborate with those new realities in Iran.
Absolutely. And I really, really appreciate that perspective. Deputy Director Alireza Jafarzadeh of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, thanks for taking a moment to tell us about kind of some of the updates on how the Western world is now hopefully going to respond with some finality to the Iranian nuclear program. And we pray for your people and their freedom.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Appreciate your support.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Alright guys, so while Tony is on a quick break, I'm just going to mute this real quick. So, as I always say guys, I know this was a little bit different, but I did that on purpose because the Trump versus Iranian nuclear program, I wanted us to watch a little bit of that just because it's about nukes. So, having served in the military and nukes are a serious thing, I wanted to pay attention to it. I wanted you guys to see it. So, he's going to go on to talk about some judicial things. The reason why I'm having us watch this is because Tony is actually live in the Daily Signal. I watch pretty often. So I just kind of wanted to watch it along with you guys. And then I might react to some of it, probably not too much tonight. Just turn around and react to more of it tomorrow. But we go live here every single day on this channel pertaining to news in real life. Whatever people ask me to react to, most of the time I'm on politics and sometimes religion. So I wanted to play this for you guys so we can kind of watch it along together. They're going to go he's going to go into some judicial things next. So we're just going to kind of watch that. I've watched some of it. I'm a little bit ahead, but I'm going to go ahead and play it so he can finish it out.
It is always a treat when I get to deliver for office. That is your right. There is no reason it's in Indiana now, Republican school board candidates are allowed to declare that they are Republican. And school board candidates that claim to be conservative and refuse to be part of the Republican Party or aren't allowed to be a Republican on the ticket don't get to mooch off of votes of people who don't know what they're voting for. And that's fantastic. Again, I have advocated for a bill that was exactly this, I'll argue, watered down, where you are allowed, if you want to declare that you're a part of a party when you run for office, that is your right. There is no reason that someone who doesn't want people to know what they are get to keep you from declaring a party on the ballot. That is excellent news. I'm looking forward to Governor Braun signing that bill. Was I expecting 2025 to be the excellent year of legislation that it has been so far? Nope. But we're here anyway. So I'm absolutely enjoying every bit of that. Now, on to other more national news. A San Francisco district court judge has now issued some type of super duper freeze injunction to forbid the Trump administration from deporting or removing any more Venezuelan Tren de Aragua gang members. And this is 100% going straight to the Supreme Court. And I don't mean right now, it's going to go through the appellate process, but this will be a Supreme Court issue that will become not just a judicial decisions on the president exercising his Article 2 constitutional authority over the executive branch. This will become a jurisdiction of district court judges issue. And I want to make that clear. That is for both Republican appointed judges and Democrat appointed judges. During the Biden administration, when a Texas district court judge ruled against the Biden administration, when Biden said that he wanted the southern border of the United States operating a certain way, and the Texas district court judge said no, that was not his authority to do so. It wasn't. It was not his authority to tell the President of the United States how to do foreign policy. Unpopular. Did I agree with Biden? No. Do I think the Supreme Court should have intervened and knocked over Biden's interpretation of the law? Yes, because that is the role of the Supreme Court of the United States. And Republican administration, same thing. Some San Francisco, some Washington, D.C., some Chicago, some New York judge does not get to waltz in and say, I declare that actually everything is the way that I want it to be. Because if you have a system like that, then what you will find is district court judges from around the country just playing patty cake and whack-a-mole for all time. Because if this becomes a process where this becomes a habit, then eventually you'll have the district court judge from Eastern Tennessee react to smack down an injunction, and you'll have some district court judge from Montana thaw some freeze from a district court judge in DC, and no one will know what's going on. Again, this is why executive branches function the way they are. The executive branch is not a stop and vote for it situation. If you're in a crisis, or if there's any kind of decision that needs to be made regarding the military, and it is an immediate national security issue, and yes, Venezuelan gang members inside this country qualifies as a national security issue. Well, boys, girls, and squirrels, you don't need a committee to sit there and vote on it. You know, you don't have a crew of firemen that shows up to a burning building. They get out of the fire truck, they see the building's on fire, and there are several ways that firemen tackle things. That's why they have a chief. That's why they send guys who are leaders on the run in order to make sure that the appropriate strategy is used to save the individuals trapped by the fire and put out the fire. When the firemen arrive, they don't go, all right, let's have a vote for committee. Okay, roll call. Who thinks that we should hook up the hydrants and then get out the flame retardant powder? Who thinks we should call out and see if anybody is around?
Your firefighter needs to
direct democracy over every action becomes mob rule. In a republic, you have separate branches. One branch handles legislation. One branch is the executive. Now you elect an executive to hold a certain portion of executive duties. And then you have a judicial system that maintains the interpretation of the law.
Break it down.
Now that doesn't mean that they get to universally decide how the law works and what the law says and what every law means, and that's like why you explain judicial stuff to a child. The idea that just because a federal judge in a district has the ability to interpret the federal law in their district means that they can issue nationwide injunctions is not a thing. For any political party, for any place, at any given time. No. And so with those two particular bits of news, I gotta tell you, what's gonna be the focus of the American people this summer are gonna be two things. Number one, how the Trump administration is allowed to use the executive authority. So far, the Trump administration, by complying as much as possible with judicial orders, has been pretty fair about all of this. So the Supreme Court will be the focal point this summer. Number two, how the Trump tariffs affect the economy over a period of about 2 months. And with that said, we're going to see you tomorrow on some more pre-tariff stuff. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast. You guys have an excellent evening. Take care.
All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and pause this real quick. All right. So there was something I wanted to react to today, Chad. I was gonna spend some time with you guys. So there was a great podcast that I wanted to react to. It's only been 6 days ago now. So I found this probably right the day that it happened. I watched it at work. And it is two people who I really like a lot. And I was like, this is an interesting dynamic. And this is Stephen A. Smith, who we know very well as a sports commentator, and then Ben Shapiro. So they actually are having a conversation, and the majority of the conversation is actually pertaining to George Floyd. So I thought that this would be a great thing to watch because you have two very different ends of the spectrum. You have Stephen A. Smith asking why is it wrong for people to have an emotional response to George Floyd, and then you have Ben Shapiro really laying out the facts in a way where I want to say is pretty decent. It's pretty. He's doing it nicely in a way where it's like, hey, even if maybe you started on one side, the way he's laying it out, it causes you to really think about some things. Mind you, in case you guys are totally uninformed about this, I believe Ben Shapiro was the one who started some type of petition to get Derek Chauvin released from prison. If it wasn't him, I know it was someone, and it was someone who's closely affiliated with the Conservative Party, and I believe they were up to 50,000 signatures, and that was as of 6 days ago. So they're probably much further along now. But I don't want to short anybody because we do daily live streams on this channel every single day, except Sunday. Pamela Stewart, Jasmine Crockett is a black supremacist racist. Yeah, she definitely plays that role. I can't even lie. She definitely does sometimes. And you know, a lot of black and brown people that look like me, whether they're mixed or not, I just happen to be a part of a mixed family, and that doesn't even matter because some of my family, even if I were to say something like that out loud, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I can't believe you have that type of view of Jasmine Crockett or any Democrat. And I'm just like, yeah, so I'm like the black sheep. It's fine. I could say that sometimes she does put that rhetoric out there, and she does come off like it really comes off like she's racially focused, because when toxic, I call it toxic, DI is just a focus. You know, it just comes off like that. Everything has to be fair. Everything's not going to be fair in life. We know that. It would be nice if everything could be like that, but that's just not how life works out. And then on top of that, for her to be a Democrat and then make fun of Governor Abbott from Texas who's in a wheelchair, it was like distasteful as hell. I didn't like it. I was like, really, Jasmine Crockett? I'm like, you come from a political party where, dude, you guys are not supposed to make fun of people. God bless you, brother. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela. Thanks for stopping by. Do me a favor and hit that like button for me. Please, please. It's free. It takes you 1 second. But, yeah, so when I see parties act this way, I'm super troubled because, one, they're starting to show out, right? So even if there is a bad side to them, they're really starting to tell on themselves, enough at least to the point where the American people can see it. And this is what I think the Democrats have done literally since Trump won the election. Like, I have no idea what their problem is. I don't care if people vote Democrat or Republican or independent. To each is its own. I vote the way I want to vote. Like, I have people that are in my sphere of friends and they think I should vote one way, and usually I vote the total opposite, and I think they should vote one way and they usually vote the total opposite. So whatever, we can agree to disagree. But nonetheless, it was still distasteless. I think for Jasmine Crockett, the latest thing she did was to make fun of Governor Abbott from Texas, and he's in a wheelchair, and she called him Hot Wheels. Now, I mean, whatever. She could have been facetious. It could have been a small joke, but it wasn't funny. And I mean, as someone who pays close attention to the Democratic Party, and they're supposed to be for all of this equality and all of this, like, everything's fair, I'm like, it's not really fair for you to make fun of somebody who got struck by a tree when they were in their 30s and they've been in a wheelchair for like the last 20 years. So I'm not really sure where that came from, but I think this just proves how much the party's in disarray. So obviously you aren't a tribal thinker, so let me ask you, why has America become so tribal in your opinion? Culture, I would say. Just what's being fed to culture. And it's things that are very anti-American and might I also add very anti-biblical. But when we have a lot of people who are not interested in God or don't care about God or even think about Him, that's one factor of it. The other factor is just what's being driven by the mainstream media. It's like, first of all, other than being so opinionated, everybody is so offended. Like, I don't understand how do you wake up offended? Because if you wake up offended, you're gonna have a long day. So I don't really understand how every single thing that's said, you know, at one point in time the Canadian flag was offensive. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, dude, we gotta take a chill pill here. Like, every single thing can be offensive, or else when something that's actually offensive comes around, we'll be blind to it, we'll be numb to it, it'll pass by us because every single thing is offensive. We gotta be able to filter this stuff out. So as far as Stephen A. Smith and Ben Shapiro, I thought this was good to watch because just being transparent with you guys, my wife would be made more privy to this information than you. But George Floyd was a hard time for me. And the reason why I would say he was a hard time is because a lot of the rhetoric that I was seeing in the media, it just wasn't good. First of all, just being able to watch the man breathe his last breath wasn't good for anybody, whether they were black or white. I don't know if y'all actually saw the protest, but this was not like it was a black protest. I remember watching George Floyd's protest and I was like, holy hell, they made the white people mad. Like, I remember thinking about that. I'm a little younger. Let me see here. I'm a little younger, but I thought as Americans we were basically family. There's so much hate anymore, both sides. When things popped off, the world was stage would come together, I believe. Yeah, I think that I hope that it doesn't take that long, but unfortunately, Scripture says it will, and unfortunately, for some people to look at just their fellow neighbor like family, it's going to take, like you said, a lot of bad things to pop off. That's kind of how we should already look at each other. Just because I make it be known on my channel that I'm a Christian, so most people that stop by here, they kind of already know at some point I'm going to talk about it. But you know, when we have someone in Scripture, particularly ask Jesus, and this is also a biblical scholar, this would have been a teacher of the law, ask Jesus, who's my neighbor? And Jesus tells a parable about a man who two people passed by and one helped him, and the two people that passed by him would have been the two people closest to him. They would have been people that if anyone were going to stop for this man, it would have been one of these two people, and they did it. And it turned out to be a complete foreigner, a stranger, a person who's not even from his people, his land, or anything. And I think that goes to show you that Jesus is trying to teach us that everybody is your neighbor. Whoever is closest to you. It doesn't matter if it's the mailman, the milkman, a neighbor across the street, a neighbor down the road. We're supposed to treat everybody like a neighbor. But I think that it's easier for someone who belongs to Jesus to kind of grasp that concept and learn about it. And for someone who doesn't, it's harder. It's kind of like if you haven't done me a favor, if I haven't known you since first grade, like you're not my neighbor, you're not my friend, you know? Thank you, Pamela. I appreciate you. I don't trust YouTube either. It's just, and that might be me being a millennial and being raised by baby boomers, but I don't trust YouTube either. YouTube's actually highly annoying to me, and they're always giving me copyright claims if I react to the right thing. So if I do anything on mental health, if I do anything that they don't like, they tend to bother me, and I fight copyright claims. And because of the Lord, thanks be to God, I usually win them and they remove them from my channel. But I don't trust YouTube either. And I think a lot of millennials are very skeptical because our parents are baby boomers. And baby boomers are skeptical, you know. They are heavily biased. They really are. They really are. I hope they're not turning into the left-wing media, mainstream media that we see. But sometimes it kind of feels like it. They're definitely with the whole censorship thing. Like, they're probably not going to like that I'm saying this now, but they're not going to be able to put anything on my channel because of it, because I'm live. So when I go live and I react to things, I'm reacting. They can't really do anything about that. So, all right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and play this conversation between Stephen A. Smith and Ben Shapiro. I really encourage you guys to pay attention, those of you that hop in and out the chat and watch this, because this was a really good conversation. And I'm probably going to react to it again tomorrow around 4 p.m. my normal time, but we're going to play it tonight because it was just that good.
He's got his own podcast and YouTube show. The man has more than 7.2 million subscribers. He is one of the preeminent conservative voices in the world, not just this country. And he's somebody that called me a jackass. He wanted to see his boy, your boy, as in me. Well, here I am, the Stephen A. Smith Show with Mr. Ben Shapiro. Up next, holla. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the special edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, coming at you, as I love to do, usually 3 times a week at the very minimum, over the digital airways of YouTube and, of course, iHeartRadio. I want to thank all my followers and subscribers for continuing to show love for the show. Keep it coming, and I'm going to keep on coming. I wanted to transition on a show like today from the regular norm. There's not going to be a potpourri of topics. It's just a conversation with an individual by the name of Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro is a guy that's been around for a while. He's established himself in the conservative community as one of the preeminent voices. He's beloved by a lot of conservatives, a lot of right-wingers. He's unapologetic about his positions on practically most, if not all, occasions. And he certainly was that way when it came to talking about Derek Chauvin, the officer most of us believe, and the courts clearly believed, murdered George Floyd several years ago, sparking riots across the country at that particular moment in time. Derek Chauvin, an officer, police officer from Minneapolis, Minnesota, ended up being convicted and sentenced to more than 21 years in prison. And in my estimation, he absolutely positively deserved it. Derek Chauvin is an individual that I believe murdered George Floyd, that most Black Americans feel murdered George Floyd, along with a bevy of other people, not just Blacks, not just whites, but even people in the conservative communities. The Sean Hannitys of the world and others proclaim the same thing. Ben Shapiro himself felt that way initially with what he had tweeted out. Upon further reflection, as the trial went on, as evidence came forward, he believed otherwise. And once Derek Chauvin was convicted and sent to prison, in the aftermath of that, Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, ultimately became the 47th president of the United States, winning this last election in November of 2024. And from that moment on, once he re-entered the White House on January 20th, 2025, Ben Shapiro has stated for the record that he believes Donald Trump should pardon Derek Chauvin. I took exception to that. I didn't know what he was thinking. I said to myself, why would you suggest such a thing? And I even went so far as to say, or to ask Ben Shapiro, a devout Jew who is incredibly supportive of Israel and the Jewish community and issues pertaining to the Jewish community, I asked a simple question: if George Floyd had been Jewish and there was a knee on his neck for over 9 minutes, would he feel the same way? So Ben Shapiro, with his own platform, which is very formidable, I might add, came right back, accused me essentially of race baiting, says it's something that I do all the time, says he's got to turn down the volume every time I'm speaking. He said a lot of things about me, and to his credit, when I invited him on the show to have a man-to-man conversation, he did not hesitate. He actually was supposed to do this days ago. I had to postpone. So, giving credit where credit is due, giving him an opportunity to express whatever it is that he wanted to express to me, about George Floyd, about the whole situation involving his murder at the hands of Derek Chauvin and beyond, I was more than happy to do so. Gave me 30 minutes of his time. And I think it's safe to say that both of us might have learned a little thing or two from this conversation we had. How pleasant was it? How tense was it? You'll have to watch to see for yourself. I'm not gonna give away the details. All I'm gonna tell you is that it's worth watching. And keep in mind, it's me leaning on what I always tell y'all. You might think differently than me politically. You might come from a different ethnic background. Your ideology may not be the same as mine. I'm a centrist who leans left. He clearly leans right. I'm not one of those people who believes because you don't think the way that I think that you should be vilified and excoriated and what have you. Just because you think differently than me doesn't mean I'm going to shut you down and I don't want to hear a damn word that you have to say. I'm not built like that. I believe grown-ups get together and talk and hash things out in a respectful and decent manner. He called me a jackass. I don't know whether he's capable of doing what I just described myself as doing and being, but I'm about to find out. This is a listening session, asking what I want to ask, but listening to his point of view and his perspective, and showing him the respect any decent human being deserves. That's what I'm going to do with Ben Shapiro up next. I do not believe this is a conversation you want to miss. More of the Stephen A. Smith Show in a minute, right after I pay these bills. Everybody listen up. With all the big time sports action that's happening each and every day, the Stephen A. Smith Show wants to make sure you are taking advantage of it all. That's why we partnered with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching sports. The app is really easy to make a lineup. All you have to do is pick more or less on when you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, you'll get $50. Just use promo code SAS and download Prize Picks right now. Again, download the app and use code SAS to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game.
Run your game.
My next guest is a conservative media personality and host of the Daily Wire's The Ben Shapiro Show. He recently made headlines by calling for Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who killed George Floyd, to be pardoned. So we're going to get right into that, please.
Okay, so it was Ben Shapiro who called for Derek Chauvin to be pardoned. I thought it was him. And 6 days ago, as of 6 days ago, I know he had at least 50,000 signatures on that petition. I'm not sure where it's at now, so I will try to find an update for you guys because I am going to react to this again tomorrow around my normal time, which is usually 4 p.m. when I'm reacting to about 4 or 5 other things. But you guys can also hop on tomorrow. Then tonight is more about you guys just watching it. I'm going to digest it with you guys tomorrow, at least clips of it, and then we're going to talk about it. But it was a great conversation, so I wanted to play the whole thing.
Welcome to the show, the one and only Mr. Ben Shapiro. Ben, how are you, sir? How's everything?
Thank God, doing well, Stephen. How are you doing?
Okay, I want to ask, and I ask this affectionately. I'm not trying to be insinuating. You called me a jackass. How many dudes do you call a jackass and then you go on this show? Can you tell me that? Can you answer that one first?
I appreciate you having me on, and the invitation, as you know, is open the other way around. It's shockingly, the answer's probably a lot, actually. In terms of people, if I've called them jackass, who I've been actually become friendly with, or who I've had on the show, or vice versa. So, you know, you're in this business, you know it.
I got you. I'm not overly offended. Trust me on that, all right? But thank you for coming on the show. So let's get right into it. As you know, I spoke out against your petition to get President Trump to pardon former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. For those that don't know, Chauvin was sentenced to 22 years in prison after being convicted of unintentional second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter of George Floyd. I wondered if you would feel that way if the officer was black and the victim was Jewish. That was what I said, and your response was to call me a race baiter. Why is that, Ben Shapiro?
Well, to me, the entire case against Derek Chauvin was rooted in a sort of public racial essentialism that I thought was unnecessary to analyze the case. If I'm going to look at this case and just look at the facts of the case, the race of the person on the ground and the race of the officer are irrelevant, and we should treat it exactly the same, whether both people were black, both people are white, one person was Jewish, one person was not Jewish. The identity of the person on the ground, I think, should not be the deciding factor in whether or not Derek Chauvin was convicted of second-degree murder. It should be the situation, the facts of the case, the autopsy report, and all of the rest. And so the thing that I actually objected to was the suggestion that my opinion would have changed rooted in the, say, racial or religious identity of the person who died as opposed to the racial or religious identity of the person who was the police officer. I just don't think that that's how we ought to decide criminal justice cases in general.
In fairness to you, I can understand that in general. Damn it, in most instances, I can agree with that. But those are cases that we hear about. I'm talking about the visual impact. So let's stay right there, Ben. I am a black man, and I see this black man on the ground, face down, handcuffs behind him. Face is imprinted into the pavement. The knee of the police officer is on the back of his neck. He's literally saying he can't breathe, to one point crying for his mama. And it happens for over 9 minutes. I understand from a technical perspective, from a specific analytical perspective, forensic evidence, etc., fentanyl in the system, etc. I got all of that. My point is, and my question to you at that time was, seeing that, how could you have another opinion? How could it be based on the preponderance of evidence that you threw into the fray in order to ask for this man to be pardoned? I'm just going by, like, there are certain things that you just see, and 1 + 1 = 2.
So, I mean, Stephen, actually, if you go back to my tweets at the time, May 30th and June 1st, if you look at my tweets, I'm saying the same kind of things you're saying right now. I'm saying the same kind of things at that time that everybody else is saying, seeing the tape, because there's no way to look at the tape.
I saw that.
And not be sort of shocked by what you're seeing on the tape, obviously. And then I think that the mark of a reasonable person is to change your opinion as the evidence changes. A lot of evidence emerged between the time that the tape was released, that horrible 9-minute tape, and the time the conviction actually happened. I mean, there was a full trial, there were autopsy reports, there was witness evidence, there were other people whose testimony was taken, there were multiple medical specialists who were called. And so in looking at all of that, that's the way we're supposed to adjudicate whether or not a person deserves to spend 22 years in prison, not based simply on our immediate gut response to tape. And again, I had the same gut response to the tape that you did, and I think that everybody did. I think actually that tends to be the gut response of people when we see a lot of police activity. Actually, it turns out that the police do a lot of things that look really rough on tape and really difficult on tape, and this was one of those things. And then as we later learned that, for example, the sort of tactic that Chauvin is using there it's actually trained by the Minneapolis Police Department, right? Putting a submission technique that's used if you have a person who's resisting arrest, or if you learn during the course of the investigation that George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," before he was even taken out of the car. He says, "I can't breathe" on the longer tape 6 times before he's even taken out of the car. I mean, it's a very long interaction with the police officers before you get to that 9-minute tape, the part that we all saw. And there's a part of the story that you can't see on the tape, which is the reverse angle. You can't see that there's a big crowd that's shouting at Chauvin. Chauvin is responding to that crowd. One of the preliminaries to getting up off of Floyd that way is to call what's called a code 4, which is where it's an all clear, where you feel that the crowd is not a threat to you. In fact, even the EMTs who showed up to provide care for Floyd didn't call a code 4 when they arrived on scene because they thought that the crowd was too threatening. So once you take into account all of the facts, if your opinion doesn't change and the fact pattern is different from what you originally thought it was, then you're not doing your job as a commentator. So I can have the same gut response that you have when I first see that tape. The question is what you do when more of those facts emerge, when you do see more of that evidence emerge, when you do read the testimony and see the autopsies.
See, but I believe, and this is just my belief, because in fairness to you, you're absolutely right. You did put out that tweet initially, and your position was it was shared by the Hannitys of the world, the Mark Levins of the world, and various others, obviously with a lot of people on the left as well, before the preponderance of evidence that you're alluding to came into play. I get that. So in fairness to you, I have to say that. But sometimes I'm going to say this to you because you're a pretty brilliant dude. Nobody can deny it. With what you've accomplished with the Daily Wire, what you've been able to do in your career. I'm just reading something. You were a syndicated columnist at the age of 17, for crying out loud. This is who you are. This is who I'm talking to here. Is it possible that sometimes we could be so brilliant that our intellect gets in the way of common sense? For example, what I mean by that is this, Ben. It was a knee on his neck for 9.5 minutes. If that didn't happen, is he still alive? I'm not talking about today because anything could have happened to you. I'm just saying, the fact that Derek Chauvin's knee was on his neck, that to me should speak for itself, because if the man is clamoring for you to get off the back of his neck while you got him handcuffed into the ground, okay, why is it wrong for us to stop there and say that was excessive on the part of the police officer because you had him contained, he wasn't a threat to you? What's wrong with that thinking?
Okay, so there are a couple of things that could be argued by the defense, and in fact were argued by the defense in this case. One of them, again, was that this was a trained technique by the Minneapolis Police Department to keep somebody in this position so long as you have not called a code 4, which is where you say there's an all clear, and now you can move the person who's on the ground into the ambulance, for example, if you've already called the ambulance, or back into the police vehicle. When it comes to the actual question as to causation of death, right, you have to be the proximate cause of the death. It's not just enough for it to be a contributing factor, because it turns out that increased stress can cause death in a person who has a human heart that is significantly larger than normal. The autopsy showed that Floyd, unfortunately, had an incredibly enlarged heart, much heavier than normal. His lungs were much larger than a normal person's lungs because of heavy and over time drug use. He had 11 nanograms of fentanyl in his system at the time per milliliter of blood, which is over 3 times what it would cause normally to kill somebody. The original autopsy report openly said that if George Floyd had been found in his house in the same exact physical condition, they would have called it death by overdose. So, all of these things taken into account raises the question of reasonable doubt, right? The standard in our criminal justice system is in fact a reasonable doubt standard. And that raises the question as to why there's not, at the very least, reasonable doubt. So you can say that your sort of first jump at this is he's guilty, look at the knee on his neck. There's no damage to his neck tissue, by the way, in the autopsy report. You can say all of that, and you can say that that's a plausible explanation. I won't even make the case that that's not a plausible explanation. I'll make the case that a plausible explanation is not enough to convict a man in court, especially based on the surrounding circumstances, the amount of pressure that was brought. This was not a fair trial, is one of the points that I'm making. So when it comes to the actual trial itself, there were members of the jury who were at actual rallies wearing shirts that said "I can't breathe" before they were actually on the jury. There are members of the jury who have openly said that they felt public pressure to convict in a particular way. The President of the United States, or one of the people who was running for President of the United States at the time, Joe Biden, was openly calling for his conviction. The Minneapolis city paid the family of George Floyd, I believe it was a $27 million payout in the middle of the trial. So all of this tends to go to, is that an impartial jury, right? These all have serious consequences for the jury system. And so there's really a few separate questions. One is, was Chauvin responsible for Floyd's death? I think on that question, I would say no. You can say yes. I would say at the very least there's reasonable doubt. And then there's the question of the amount of pressure that was brought on the jury in this particular case to bring a verdict. This was the most highly publicized trial of the modern era by a long shot, because the incident itself had spurred so much public angst and outrage and massive protests involving 20 million people, and riots that had cost the taxpayers from $2 billion, or insurance companies from $2 billion. It was the most highly publicized trial probably since the OJ trial. And because of that amount of public pressure, did Chauvin receive a fair trial is obviously a very crucial question here.
But it sounds like your position is that this is more of a political issue as opposed to a policing issue. And what I would say to you as a black man in America, that there are times, and there's a preponderance of evidence throughout the years that shows that policing has been an issue as it pertains to black men, which is one of the things that we constantly bring up. So when that incident happened, I'm thinking about the officer himself, Ben Shapiro, and his intent from the standpoint, you're having your knee on the back of his neck. No matter what, from a medical perspective, we can deduce may have transpired in the end if you didn't have your knee on the back of his neck for that amount of time or exceeding 9 minutes. This would not have been the outcome. And because you were insensitive to that, as a trained police officer who should know better, there should be a level of culpability that comes in your direction. So when somebody looks at you, I look at, and this is where I wanted to go as well, I'm looking at a Ben Shapiro, and this is what I meant when I asked the question about you being, about if George Floyd was a Jewish person. I owe you an explanation for that, so I want to give it to you right now. You are known as a proud Jewish individual, incredibly supportive of the Jewish community, being amongst them, Israel, other things. And I was bringing this up because I said, if that were a Jewish person, the conclusion that you ultimately reached, would you have been patient enough to draw that conclusion, peeling from the information that was deduced on an objective level to reach the conclusion that, hey, you know what? I don't think he should have been put in jail. That's where I was going because I know how defensive, or I shouldn't say defensive, but a defender of the Jewish community that you are. And that's what I was thinking along those lines.
Well, I mean, but I certainly hope so, because I can name you a dozen Jewish criminals who absolutely deserve to be in jail, right? And Jeffrey Epstein was a Jew.
No, I'm just talking about that kind of incident.
Hell, right? I mean, I think that.
I'm just talking about that kind of incident.
And my point is that whenever, I'm also a lawyer, right? I mean, my identity as a Jew does not mean I have solidarity with a criminal who happens to be a Jew, or a person who's in a controversial law enforcement confrontation who happens to be a Jew. I mean, my job is to literally remove myself from it. And I think also that, as those original tweets show, I don't think that you have to have racial solidarity with the person in order to feel empathy for that person's situation. I think that the whole basis of a democratic republic, or us having a conversation right now, is the fact that we can speak to each other across racial and identitarian lines.
Right.
And so, again, I think that there are an enormous number of people in the country who disagree with me, by the way, who share both my race, and a lot of Jews who, I would say the vast majority who disagree with me on this, or many white Americans who looked at George Floyd and had exactly the same reaction. And as you say, initially, I had the same reaction as you, and that had nothing to do with race. And so the kind of idea that let's put it this way, if race is a barrier to logic, then race is the problem, not the solution. Right? Let me ask you this. I mean, if you looked at, you said before that you didn't look at the autopsy report, you're not taking a lot of time looking at the evidence of the autopsy. What would it take for you to change your mind on the case, or is there nothing that could change your mind on the case because you saw the tape, for example?
Well, it wouldn't take much, and this is why I said this, because normally I would look at the autopsy reports or whatever. I saw people bringing up his arrest record. I saw people bringing up fentanyl in the system. I saw all of these things. And all I could come to, Ben, fair or unfair, was that none of that matters if he wasn't on the ground with a knee on the back of his neck for 9+ minutes. Because I'm looking at a trained police officer who should know better. I looked at the experts who were saying, they're trained. There was no reason, and you saw it. I'm sure you saw this, and not to say that you would embrace it with the level of sincerity that others may, because I know the level of skepticism that you look at when you see the news outlets. And by the way, I don't blame you. I'm with you on that, okay? But I would say to you, listening to experts talk about how police officers are trained and pointed to the fact that Derek Chauvin had no business being in that position and putting George Floyd in that position, particularly once he was handcuffed and contained. To me, that, along with the ultimate outcome, is all the evidence I need. And that's where we might differ.
I mean, that's totally fair if we differ on that. I guess the question I would ask you is, given the fact that that was a Minneapolis Police Department trained protocol, given the fact that Floyd did ask to be removed from the car, I mean, in the lead up to the situation, the part of the tape that nobody watches, he was actually outside the car. The police officers moved him inside the car. He says he's claustrophobic, and then he claims 6 consecutive times that he cannot breathe while he's in the car. So if the idea is that it was the police officer's knee that deprives him of breath, he was already claiming that he couldn't breathe inside the car, suggesting he was already in the middle of some sort of medical event, right? And then he was brought outside the car. I guess the question that I have for you, again, is what level of evidence would need to be shown to create a reasonable doubt? I mean, you seem incredibly certain, right? And all I'm saying is that the reasonable doubt standard is what pertains in criminal justice. What would it take to get you to reasonable doubt? Or is there no reasonable doubt that could be achieved simply by dint of the fact that he had his knee on his neck? By the way, it's not for the full 9 minutes. There are minutes where it's on his back. I mean, even the prosecution acknowledges that. The real question is, I think, the last 50 seconds, right? The last 50 seconds of the tape where Floyd stops breathing and Chauvin's knee is still on his neck. That is really the question as to whether this goes into criminal charge territory. Otherwise, he ends up being in a position where he's actually just using a typical subdual technique before you put the guy back in the car and you take him off to jail.
And I'm saying, to answer your question, there's absolutely nothing that could convince me that Derek Chauvin deserved a different outcome because of what you just articulated, what we saw, even if it's for the last 50 seconds. I'm not changing my position. I'm sure where you're coming from.
I mean, this is a real question. So we've talked about race a little bit. Do you think that Chauvin was a racist? This is a race-based crime, in your view?
Do I believe that?
Yes.
I don't believe that based on anything about his history that they articulated, because I know how people conjure up evidence to go at it. I do believe his actions indicated that, because I didn't see him doing that with anybody else. and the times that we were living in, and the climate, as you articulated accurately, I might add, the heightened level of sensitivity that it exists because of brutality on the part of some police officers. By the way, I never say police brutality because I don't like to castigate all police officers that way. I know if I'm in trouble, I'm calling 911. I'm not going to sit up there and denigrate police officers throughout this country. But there's rogues that exist in every profession, and I think there's rogues that exist with certain police officers. So to me, he came across as one, and that was my problem with it. Having said that, I want to get to something else because we're going to stay on this subject of race in this regard. When you saw the climate that exists, I understand you believe it was primarily instigated by the left. I want to know where you draw the line in the sand, and in terms of veering away from the political and just looking at a case on its merit and saying, this is what I see, this is where I stand, completely devoid of politics. I'm not talking race, I'm talking politics, meaning this has nothing to do with politics. This is the climate that we're living in. This officer should have known better, etc. Do you ever find yourself in a position where you're able to dismiss yourself from the political impact of something or the political agenda of something to draw your conclusions?
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that in this particular case, this is a good indicator of trying to withdraw from a political sort of calculation, given the fact that, as some people have pointed out, on a pragmatic level, it suggested that President Trump pardoning Derek Chauvin would be bad for President Trump politically. And the case that I've made is that's his job to determine what's pragmatic for him politically. It's my job to call something out as wrong when I see it to be wrong. In terms of criminal justice cases that have involved race, where I've removed myself on the other side, I mean, there are a bunch of them. Walter Scott, right, is a great example of a black man who was victimized by a white police officer. The police officer ends up convicted and going to jail. You're saying I'm not campaigning on his behalf because he deserves to go to jail, the officer in the Walter Scott case. There have been a number of horrifying or police-involved crimes in which the police officer deserves to lose his job and or go to jail, depending on the activities of the police officer. And you have to analyze those one by one. And I think that what we've seen, particularly from the legacy media over the course of the last many years, is that the only types of stories that tend to break into the news are ones with a black victim and a white police officer. And the media immediately jumped to a particular narrative conclusion on the basis of that. And even if the facts end up debunking that conclusion, that narrative continues to be maintained. You know, a good example of this might be Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, where the initial claim was that Michael Brown was shot in the back by a police officer in cold blood. And it turned out that every aspect of that story was false. And yet there are still people who will, sort of repeat the hands up, don't shoot lie that never happened. I mean, that literally never happened. And that was debunked by the Eric Holder Department of Justice, for example. Okay. So I think that we really do have to look at each one of these situations in isolation. We're talking about the life of a person. If you're talking about narrative, if you're talking about sort of generalized race in America, then I think that it's important to look at as much data as humanly possible. I'm a data-driven person, and so I'll look at everything from the studies of Roland Fryer over at Harvard University about police misconduct toward minorities, and it ranges on the scale, by the way. What Roland Fryer studies tend to show is that, for example, there's no disproportionate killing of black men by the police. There's disproportionate use of lower-level uses of forces by police depending on the circumstance based on race. So that's something Roland Fryer has found at Harvard. Right? That's the sort of conversation that I think is useful and interesting. But I think that when it gets telescoped into one particular case, and then that case is used as sort of the meta-narrative justifier, that's really negative, and that's really bad for the country. Because what we should be doing, you want to lose trust in the criminal justice system overall, telegraph all race relations into the OJ case, the Michael Brown case, the Derek Chauvin case, the George Floyd case. If you take all of America's race relations and you sort of put it on the back of one particular fact pattern, usually the fact pattern is not capable of carrying that narrative burden.
But Ben, isn't that easy for us on the outside looking at data, looking at analytics to draw those conclusions, as opposed to us having a personal experience or a personal investment in it? Like, for example, when it comes to the Jewish community, I would never think for 1 second that I could fully grasp and inhale what you experience as a Jewish person in the United States of America. When we've seen heightened levels of anti-Semitism, for example, and people alluding to those kind of things. Well, I'm not a Jewish person, so I wouldn't know. What about the argument that when we talk about black folks, you can point to data all you want to, and we get that part, but the real experiences that we endure from time to time is not something that you can necessarily calculate. How serious do you take those assertions coming from a community, whether it's your own mind or anybody else's?
Obviously, it's true that we can never fully get into one another's shoes, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the world, and that's true beyond race. That's just true for individuals. You, Stephen, or me as an individual, you can't live in my shoes. I can't live in yours. We're different people. We live different lives. But when it comes to making public policy, then the only sort of gauge that you can have really is the data. Because anecdotal evidence, you can't make public policy for millions of people based on anecdotal evidence because you can't legislate people's feelings. I mean, this is sort of one of my things. You know, when it comes to trying to craft law, for example, making law based on the personal feelings of people's quote-unquote lived experiences is a bad way to make law that is going to have to be generally applicable. Because I may have particular feelings about a particular criminal case based on my own personal experiences, but if we do that, then what you end up with is a really high level of tribalism in which if your racial identity prevails and my racial identity prevails, really bad things can come from that. And the law is designed to treat people as equal individuals underneath it. And so, you know, the relevance of lived experience, that may play a part in us being able to understand one another as individuals if we're having a conversation over dinner or if we're giving advice to each other about our kids. But when it comes to actually making public policy, it's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you make a valid point about policy. When you talk about policy, you can't just go by personal experience. It's got to be the numbers, it's got to be the data. I totally get that. By the way, just as an aside before I get to my next question, lung expert testified George Floyd died because his breathing was restricted. So I just wanted to point that out now, you know, because again, that with the weight on his neck, we got to remember that. But let me go to this. I mean, the Trump pardon, which you obviously was advocating for, would only affect Chauvin's federal conviction where he pleaded guilty for violating Floyd's civil rights. The pardon would have no bearing on his state sentence for second-degree and third-degree murder. Even if Minnesota Governor Tim Walz pardoned him, he'd remain in prison regardless of Trump's actions. Of all the things to ask President Trump to pardon, then, why this, Ben? Why
So I asked President Trump to do many, many things. This is certainly not the only thing that I'd like President Trump to do, ranging from tariff policy to foreign policy to tax policy. There are many things that I ask President Trump to do on a daily basis on the show. On this one, because I think that it was such a driver of a narrative that I actually do think is false and has been damaging in the United States, which is the idea that there is a tremendous amount of racial tension in America and that's accelerated over the past couple of decades. I think that it's important to elevate individual justice above, again, that sort of group identity-based narrative for the sake of the body politic. You know, the BLM movement of 2020 was at the very least incredibly divisive and on a material level incredibly damaging to the United States. And I think that one of the things that I'd like to get back to in the United States is a time when we actually had pretty good racial feelings about one another, and it wasn't all that long ago. I think that if you go back to the data, yes, if you go back to
between the black community and the Jewish community, sure, but the black community and white community?
So if you go back to Gallup polls in 2012, literally 2012. Okay. In 2012, 75% of white Americans thought that race relations were on a good path with black Americans, and 65% of black Americans also thought that race relations were on a good path in the United States. And then by 2014, it all jumped down into the below 50 mark for both whites and black Americans, and it never recovered from there. And one of the inciting events of that was, in fact, the riots in Ferguson and the sort of elevation of this narrative that America was deeply systemically racist in incurable ways, and that every inequality in American life can be chalked up to inequities that were buried in the founding of the country and this whole broader racial narrative, which I think, again, that the best way to get past a lot of these problems, honestly, it sounds naive, but it isn't, it's just reality. Any group problem is the best way to get past a group problem if you're an individual is to talk with another individual and to treat another individual as an individual, as opposed to trying to reduce everything's group identity, which is the reason I think I objected so strongly when you started talking about racial identity with regard to this case, because my whole point was, when it comes to interpersonal situations, the best way to treat other human beings, of course, is not as a member of a race. The best way to treat them is as individuals. And of course, race is a component of their identity, but you treat them as an individual regardless of what their race is.
Yeah, but my pushback with you would be, Ben, I came at what you said, not at you. You see what I'm saying? Because there's a lot of things that you say and do that I don't disagree with. You know, I'm a centrist, and there's some things, well, damn it, when you make sense, okay? We're having this discussion right here. I'm listening to some of your points. I'm like, hey, he's making sense or something. I mean, I get it. I might disagree, but I can't refute where you're coming from. It makes a lot of sense. And what I would ask you before we go, because I know you got to get on out of here, and I can't thank you enough for your time. And again, I'm going to come on your show when you ask me to as well. I really, really appreciate it. I'm not going to run from it. But I got to ask you this. when you talk about just treating individuals as individuals, one could easily argue that Ben Shapiro, with over 7.2 million followers, by the way, on his YouTube show, okay, let's get that out the way with the Daily Wire and what you've been doing with that for years, folks are not necessarily treated as individuals. There is groupthink. There are, and I'm not talking about just you, I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about all of us. I'm guilty of this, you're guilty, everybody in my estimation. Where we think about something, when you had an issue with how I came at you, you brought up the left. And I'm disagreeing with the left at least 50% of the time, but you associated me with the left. When you disagree with others, I've heard you associate them with a group as opposed to treating them as individuals. So that seems to be counter to what you just articulated.
So I think that you're right to point out that I should characterize you as an individual with individual political views. Sure, I can do a better job of that. And when it comes to ideological grouping, I will say there is a difference between ideological grouping and, say, racial grouping, right? Race is an immutable characteristic of who people are. No matter how many Kenny G tunes you listen to, Stephen, you'll still be a black man, and no matter and no matter what racial stereotype I engage in, I'll still be a nerdy Jewish guy. That's just the way it is. But when it comes to ideological groups are quite real, obviously, and so describing people as a member of an ideological camp, I don't think is targeting a group in the same way as it would be to target blacks as a group, or Jews as a group, or Asians as a group, or any other immutable characteristic.
Hey, Ben, we're running out of time. I know you got to go. I've got to go. I would love to further this conversation with you further into the future. Your show, my show, and it doesn't matter. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm thankful that you came on. My last question, am I still a jackass? I just want to make sure, am I still a jackass? I just want to know.
No. Now you're the best, Stephen. That's how this works.
I got you. Ben Shapiro, man, I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to coming on your show, and I'm looking forward to having you back on so we can further this conversation, because obviously we're both running out of time. Thank you for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. What's up, everybody? Stephen A. Smith here. Recently, we made news because the great Bill O'Reilly announced a tour that's coming nearest you in the very, very near future. Get your tickets.
All right, guys. So that was Stephen A. Smith and Ben Shapiro. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me go up here and see if he still talked about anything.
Things that we ultimately learn from would indicate.
Okay, so I'm gonna let him finish out this part right here, because he's still talking after him and Ben Shapiro. So let's let him finish, and then I'll close us out.
Back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Needless to say, I didn't agree with everything Ben Shapiro said. When he dissects things and gets into the particulars of what happened with George Floyd and how the preponderance of evidence that we ultimately learned from would indicate that it wasn't murder on the part of Derek Chauvin, etc. I respectfully disagree with him. But let me be decent enough to give him credit where credit is due. First of all, I found it to be very, very pleasant. And I can't say enough, I appreciate him coming on the show. You gonna call somebody a jackass, don't go hide. And he came right on the show, and he couldn't have been more pleasant, and he could not have articulated his point of view any better. I don't agree with it. I believe certain things are just simple. I mean, you're gonna put a knee on a man's back of his neck, etc., exceeding 9 minutes. I don't want to hear about things that contributed to his death. Nothing contributed more than that. I don't want to hear about an enlarged heart, because I'm thinking along the lines of, well, would that have mattered in the moment if he wasn't leaning on the back of his neck? I just think that in certain instances, 1 + 1 really, really does equal 2. And it shouldn't be that complicated. And I think that Derek Chauvin showed little to no regard for George Floyd's life. But I have to tell you that when Ben Shapiro was speaking and the facts that he doled out, I wasn't in a position to sit up there and say, you're just wrong. He talked about whether he was black, he was Jewish, or anything. I don't know Ben Shapiro. It's not for me to be accusing him of taking a position just because that was a black man, as opposed to if he were a Jew. He was right to call me out on that. He was right. Because he said, there's plenty of folks from the Jewish community, if something like that happened to them, and the evidence showed itself to be what I saw, in terms of the evidence that the George Floyd case showed itself to be, I would have taken the same position. I don't know Ben Shapiro to refute what he's saying. We have to be fair. And we're going to move forward as a society and be better in getting along with one another, in walking across aisles and dealing with one another. There has to be a level of decorum and decency and a willingness to listen and a comprehend and embrace. Even if you don't agree with it, I can understand where the person is coming from.
Even if you don't agree.
I don't agree with him about George Floyd. I believe Derek Chauvin murdered that man. And I believe he deserves exactly what he get, and I'll be damned if Trump should pardon him. But Ben Shapiro, coming from the lens that he's coming from, and the perspective that he provided, I appreciated him coming on this platform and stating it for the record. Very clear, by the way. Very in-depth, by the way. You know, he's one of those dudes. You gotta know what the hell you're talking about. You're coming after him now.
Yep.
I respected it.
I agree.
And I'm gonna live up to my word. It's not just about him on my platform. I promised him I would come on his. And when he calls, I'm going. And whatever conversation he wants to have, I'm gonna have it. Because that's what he did for me. It's called decency, y'all. I'm glad he doesn't, he didn't come to the conclusion I'm an asshole or a jackass after all. I'm glad about that. I appreciate that.
No cursing, Stephen.
But I enjoy it. I don't know how to put it, ladies and gentlemen. I enjoy hearing different perspectives and being educated about what people feel and why they feel the way that they feel. I have grown up so many years watching one politician after another, one pundit after another, lies and be complicit in so much nonsense just because they want to feed some narrative or whatever. It's good to run across people that genuinely stand on what they feel and why.
Yeah. And I'm going to stop that right there. So, guys, I'm going to stop that because tomorrow I'm going to come back at my normal time and be reacting to this with a couple of other things for the day for our daily live stream. I appreciate you guys stopping by, chilling with me on the corner. What we got here? March 31st, 2025, the last day of March. So, and it was a late night tonight, guys. But hey, as always, we're gonna be here. We're gonna be live, as we said, every single day except Sunday, until the Lord instructs me otherwise. So I appreciate you guys hanging out and chilling on the corner with me. Make sure you stop by tomorrow for our daily live stream. I should be on tomorrow. We're gonna say around 4 p.m. What's tomorrow? Tuesday. I think 4 p.m. is a good time for me. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes I follow the analytics. Sometimes I just stick to my scheduled time, but I like to stay somewhere between 1500 and 1730. 3 o'clock, 5:30 p.m. So, with that being said, guys, I appreciate you guys stopping by and chilling on the corner with me. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Tonight, we had Nuclear War Program. We had Stephen A. Smith and Ben Shapiro. Late night, but I appreciate you guys that hopped in and out of the live, that watched and hit that like button for me, guys. Remember, when you stop by, do me a favor and hit that like button for me, guys. It is free. It is free of charge, and it does not hurt, I promise. So with that being said, guys, what I always say, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, love yourselves, love one another, and be peaceful. See you guys tomorrow. Peace.